With regards to the setting, the major component that stands out is the idea of dreams themselves. As a whole, dreams make a great medium for this particular form of entertainment. I mean, RPGs in general are excellent forms of storytelling, and what better source material than dreams themselves? We design the actual lore to revolve around dreams for a multitude of reasons, but the most obvious one is that a dream has a lot of leeway and a lot of give. Much like RPG stories, the settings change and anything in theory is applicable. For the main characters of the Dreams and Magic game, a dream could be anything. It could be an experience in your favorite fantasy setting. It could be a tale of two friends under duress in our world. It could be a tale of, extreme science fiction. But the idea there is that in the future, you'll have the opportunity to play as extensive or as short of a story as you'd like in any particular setting, and have them all tie beautifully into a campaign that is set in Of Dreams and Magic. These dream experiences give groups the malleability to go from one genre to the next if they should feel so inclined, or to go and take all of the stories that they've told and loved and have some form of representation, which is another big gripe that many role players have. Stories from one to the next force you to start over, but here in Of Dreams and Magic, your main character carries over the effects of those stories everywhere they go. So you could tell a great fantasy story and have a singular character have the remnants of that fantasy story carry with them every time you tell a new one. In the world that we know of, when that dreamer is awake, they may always have a particular spell, always have a particular remnant, an artifact, if you will, that came from that great fantasy story. We all have them. Any RPGer knows that there's a particular session, a particular campaign that's stuck close to their heart. Maybe it was, defeating your nemesis after a long-running campaign. Maybe it was that final scene that saw you deliver the death blow to the great villain. Whatever the case may be, and whatever the setting, now that will carry with you. You'll forevermore have a small piece of that story, and every time you start anew, it won't be like a completely fresh start. You'll have those remnants to muse upon and possibly benefit you for the stories to come. So basically how it works is the characters, called anima, will have a singular dream, and in that dream they face a conflict. This conflict represents the doubt trying to force them not to believe in magic. And should they prevail, which each character operates under the assumption that they did, the type of dream that they experienced will have a ramification, an effect on them going forward. Whatever identity it was that they prevailed with. Maybe they had a dream where they were a superhero and they defeated a supervillain in the streets of Manhattan. Maybe they dreamt that they were a knight in a medieval setting that won a key battle. Whatever the scenario may be, that identity that helped them find victory will now carry over with them to when they wake up. These anima then awake and find that if they're willing to believe hard enough, if they have just enough conviction, they can actually become who they are in their dreams. Their dream self and their waking world self are more or less one and the same. That's the premise, and they're going forward, this doubt, this entity that wants so badly for them to not believe, it will precede its opposition by making their nightmares come to life. It's desperately trying to get these anima to stop believing before they break the whole system. So the doubt will take their nightmares and give them life to try and show the anima that if you're willing to dream, then you have to be willing to deal with the bad dreams too. And the doubt's belief is that most anima are not willing to make that sacrifice. There's only so much pain, so much fear, so much suffering a person can take. And there lies the great conflict at the core of the game. How important is it to you to know the truth? How important is it to you to believe? How important is it to know that you're capable of greatness? Is it worth facing all the things you fear? Is it worth having to deal with the trials and tribulations of your nightmares? Because at the heart of the game is the belief that we all have something that we care about deeply. We all have something that we're clinging to, that makes us special, that makes us who we are. But just how important are those things to you? Are you willing to give them up at the first sign of opposition? Are you willing to give them up at the first sign of pain or loss? Or are you willing to fight for them? Well, in this case, in the case of Dreams and Magic, people get to fight for them with literal terms. They get to actually become the heroes of their dreams and literally fight their nightmares. Obviously, in the real world, we don't have that luxury. It's all literary to us. But for the game, it's real. And that allows people to take their favorite knight from a great campaign that they've told and become that knight while walking the streets if need be. Their nightmares may be a simple monster, and their fears may be simple violence, and be afraid of what harm might come to them or their loved ones. Or they might be much more insidious, and in some people's cases, their nightmares may be an actual nemesis, an intellectual enemy that's hunting them and actively working against them. It's a hotbed for material, in our opinion, and we're hoping that you'll see it the same way. And the idea for the book itself is to give you all the materials and all of the finer details to tell any kind of campaign and any kind of story you want, and link them all together under this great blanket concept. Matt, I don't know if you'd like to touch up upon the basics of the rule system and why it is the way it is.
The goal behind our rule system is to be as involved or as simple as a play group wishes. If you want to, take your session and have it be really focused on the tactics of a situation and roll a lot of dice, basically, you can. If you want the dice to take a back seat and really just show what you're capable of doing, you can do that as well. The two core components of our rule system are pretty simple. The first one is the over-under die system. And what that allows you to do, it allows you to quickly and easily come to a conclusion as to how well your character has done according to their ability. Along those lines, you roll 2 die 10. You get a number that's either positive or negative that is then added to your ability score, which of course takes in your skill, your attributes, and all those other things into effect. You then compare that number to a difficulty, and based off of comparing to that number, you gain competitive advantage points, or cap. What cap do is they measure how much advantage you're gaining over a situation or against a specific competitor. In short, rather than a roll being I passed or I failed, or I failed miserably or I failed great, we have more gradients in there. That way you know exactly how well you passed or exactly how well you or how poorly you failed. Since most things we also found aren't usually summed up in one simple roll, oftentimes rolls can be extended beyond one round, and those carry over, showing that trying to do something isn't something that you decide whether you did it or not in 3 seconds. It can be an ongoing process where each round is contributing to your overall success or failure. And then you use that cap, basically you spend it in order to purchase what we refer to as adjustments. You purchased saying, I was capable of doing this thing, and then further adjustments allow you to specifically state, I did it faster, I did it stronger, I did it better, I did more damage. That way the players are really in control. To get away from the mechanics of that for a second, what that really does and how that really also helps the players is it allows narration to go into the player's hands. Instead of the player rolling a die, spitting out the result, and sort of looking at the storyteller and saying, well, how did I do, or what did I do? The player is making those decisions. They're accumulating cap, and they're saying, I'm going to try to disarm this guy, or I'm going to try to end this fight quickly, or I'm going to stall, that way I'm giving my friends enough time to run away. So instead of having to sort of wonder as to what they've done, they get to participate more actively.
Yeah, I think the overarching concept for the rule design was twofold. As RPG fans for many years, the big problem that we encountered so often was two things. One, narration and storytelling didn't always go hand in hand with the system itself. Oftentimes, one had to be clipped to accommodate the other. I mean, any RPGer knows there's always that moment where a player rolls either exceedingly well or exceedingly poorly, and the result would mean something completely out of character for the story. There's nothing worse than having an expert swordsman go to run through a practically defenseless enemy, and they roll so poorly that they may as well have tripped over their own feet and stabbed themselves with the sword. I mean, as comically and as foolish as that sounds, unfortunately, more often than not, that was what we encountered when we saw how die systems really worked for RPGs. They became not only cumbersome in how complicated they were, but inept at properly being able to represent what would actually happen. More often than not, the game system was designed almost separate completely from the concept of storytelling. You know, in a very common game system, it would not be unheard of for someone to succeed 1 out of every 20 some odd rolls automatically, or fail in the same ratio. That's simply foolish in our mind in the respect of the story itself. Someone who's attempting something well within their comfort zone, say an expert, marksman taking a shot at a routine target, it seems inconceivable and just downright foolish for them to be unable to hit the target. Sure, maybe sometimes they take a shot and the shot's a little bit further from bullseye than it was before, but to miss the target completely, or to hit it dead on just because, I mean, we've always come to that conclusion that it was too common for storytelling and narrative to be completely disjointed from the actual rules. So we addressed the over-under system using two 10-sided dice to create a very low math, easy to solve and compute mechanism that was controlled, so that if a particular character was exceptionally skilled and they did try something that was relatively routine and easy, they could depend on a realistic, consistent outcome from their attempts. It would be no longer a matter of holding your breath and hoping the dice didn't go against you. Even if they did in our system, a poor roll is still within an acceptable range of a character's skill level. So you avoided those situations where a simply poor roll would make a fool out of an otherwise exceptionally talented or powerful character, or vice versa, make a hero out of someone who is completely incapable of doing something. Actually, in development in jest, I would often tell Matt, if you stuck a young boy who had never fought before in the ring with a professional fighter, what are the odds that that boy is going to knock that fighter out? You can never say zero, because zero is not exactly fair. Anything could, in theory, happen. But the likelihood of that boy succeeding was as close to zero as it could be. And unfortunately, there was no way to guarantee that. Now, with our game system, we have a way to represent that fairly. Could that boy reach success? He could reach far beyond what's expected of him with a very good, very specific die roll in our system. But that would be a literal once-in-the-blue chance, and even then, far above his skill level, is still not at the level of a professional fighter. That boy who has no experience is going to do very well compared to what he's expected to perform, but he's never going to do very well compared to what the professional is expecting. So that's where the over-under die system plays a role in why we designed it the way we did. As for the other part of the mechanics, the cap that Matt mentioned, competitive advantage points, we designed them specifically because for so many years we played RPGs where players did not have control over what it is they chose to do. Every person who's played in an RPG knows what it's like to roll dice and then stare at the DM or storyteller or an Arcade Dreamweaver and just look at them with a blank face, waiting to find out what happened. All they know is what they rolled, but what actually occurred was entirely up to the other party. Now, with our system, Cap allows the player to choose exactly what happened because of their effort, because of their roll. No longer do you roll, get a number, and then just say, well, I think a 9 is good, but I'll wait until the storyteller tells me. Now, that number means something to you, and you have an intelligent choice to make as to how your efforts are going to be rewarded. And that's something that we felt wasn't in any of the systems that we looked at, and we could not find suitable satisfaction in that regard. So we designed a mechanism of our own.
And to expand on that, the mechanism is not only just important for your play at the table, but what it also allows you to do is make more unique characters. In other systems, sometimes every warrior is the same as every other warrior. The only difference is what weapon you use, or what feats you've purchased, or other small details. Through the cap system, what we were able to do is create a large amount of customizable options. We do it through using cap at the table and through creating unique adjustments for weapons and techniques and traits. That way each character can really be an individual. Let's say, for instance, you have a warrior who handles a giant warhammer. Chances are that he's going to attack slower, but he's going to focus more on doing more damage in a single strike. Most of his cap adjustments, or most of the things that he can do, will involve trying to disable his opponent, trying to injure them quickly, and hit hard. You may have, and in other systems, that would just be a warrior. On the flip side, you would have another warrior who focuses on fencing. He uses a rapier, and he's the greatest swordsman in the land. His cap adjustments could focus on parrying attacks well, and dodging them better, and quickly placing strikes to make his opponent bleed and wear them out, because he has more stamina. As I said previously, in other systems, those would both be warriors, and all that detail would just come out in role-playing. Here, you're able to make those characters as unique individuals, and they're going to play differently. I think that's part of why it's so important that another thing our system does is allows a group to play multiple characters in multiple settings, because now a warrior isn't a warrior isn't a warrior. Each warrior you play, or mage, or any other kind of character you can come up with, is different from the one that you played before. So you're going to want a chance to play with all these things, instead of just saying, well, I'm more or less going to re-roll the character I already am. Each character you make can be intensely unique. I'm talking about that mostly in a fantasy setting, but it's just as important in our full, standard setting of the waking world around us. No matter, even if you could say that two people have comparable skill, those two people are going to go about the same thing the exact same way. So you would want to be able to make a character that, on the sheet, looks like how you imagine the character to look like in your mind. And I think that was a big driving thrust towards how we designed the systems, because, again, our main focus was making sure that the systems supported the gameplay rather than the other way around, and that the systems supported the story rather than the story having to
bend the system
around.
As a good addition to that statement is, in playtest and development, we came across two perfect examples of both sides of what Matt is just explaining. The first side, on the fantasy concept of a warrior, martial characters more often than not suffer from a certain amount of homogenizing that is almost intolerable the longer you play RPGs. In so many games and so many systems, being a quote-unquote warrior or something of that nature more or less boils down to a certain sameness that is unavoidable. Whether you're swinging your sword, your battle axe, or your warhammer, it all boils down to how much damage did that particular attack do, and it gets lost in those simple numbers. There is a vast difference in combat between a guy wielding two very small blades quickly and a oaf, if you will, swinging a tremendous warhammer. There are functional and mechanical differences that are lost in most systems because they just don't accommodate for that kind of nuance. Well, in ours, they stand out dramatically so. Because of cap and because of how characters are designed, we had a playtest experience with an actual player who has played warrior-type characters through over a decade of fantasy games, and I've had the pleasure of storytelling for them on most of those occasions. And this test that we did with this particular player pretty much captured the first half of Matt's statement beautifully. He made a particular character capable of hand-to-hand combat in the playtest, and during a final scene where he was forced into melee combat with a villain, he watched while every strike and every tactical decision he made a significant impact on how his conflict played out. Knowing how to properly hamstring an opponent with a combat knife, knowing how to grapple with an opponent, knowing that he wanted to take small shots and cut and nick and gash every little bit of his opponent with every opportunity he got, to slowly bleed him, to slowly whittle him away, knowing that he had the endurance to make it to the end of that fight, and his enemy did not. His battle was won through rolling, yes, through his skill of his character, yes, but also through tactical decisions. He used the techniques and the advantages that his particular character had because he was a skilled knife fighter, because he was a skilled soldier, because he knew how to manipulate those strengths of his. He played that combat out to his own advantage and watched as every intelligent decision he made reaped him a tangible and sensible benefit. When it was over, the player told me, "That's amazing. I felt like I was actually fighting the way my character was designed. I actually chose how that combat played out, as opposed to simply rolling and then asking how it happened." That's a very real, very immediately noticeable difference for a martial character. There's nothing worse than your THAC defining your character, or what kind of weapon you're wielding is the closest detail you have as to what makes you different from the next warrior. Now, wielding weapons quickly, having particular types of strikes, doing particular types of damage, all of that is alliterated in the game rules that we've designed, and that offers players a uniqueness that they've never had in the past. And on the flip side, showing that it isn't simply for fantasy martial prowess, we also had a playtest and an example with other players that utilized mixed martial arts as the demonstration. We specifically took fighters designed on paper to be of different inclinations, whether it be an actual MMA fighter or a boxer or someone who is a conventional martial artist, and actually force them into different battles amongst one another to see how the different mechanics would play out. And wouldn't you know it, with our system, a grappler did have to tactically choose his decisions with the intent of getting into a grapple. Getting the opponent into the grapple, getting them to the ground, changed the tide of the conflict for them, opened up new possibilities for them, while the boxer would be teeing off on someone in stand-up, and as soon as that advantage was taken from them, everything fell apart. There was a real decision-making process that was never there before in an RPG system that we had seen, and a real justification for intelligently and specifically building a character exactly the way you wanted and then have it play out just that way. We feel we've done a good job of designing a rule set that allows players and their storytellers to do all of those things that they've never been able to do before with RPG systems. And we're hoping as people get a chance to really mess around with the gaminess and mechanics of it, that they'll start to see that as well.
Well said. At this point, I would say, since we still have viewers, but we don't have anyone in the chat, I don't know if that's my fault. I think in the future, we're no longer going to go with the on-air option. We're going to just open up a Google Hangout. That way it's easier for people to chat with us directly. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we close this up?
I think for anyone that is watching, or will see this there after the fact, don't forget, if you are interested in us and are interested in what we've done, make sure to check out odampublishing.com, which is our website. We'll keep regular updates there as well. And through our website, you can check out our Facebook and the current running Kickstarter if you'd like to show support. So look into all of the information we have available to you. There's a free PDF for download on the website, so you can actually see the printed version of these rules and even mess around with them yourself.
Sounds good. All right, thank everyone for watching. Thank you if you're watching this in the future, and we'll speak to you next time. Thanks.